He has gone from government, but that doesn't prevent us from holding him accountable for not only the wasteful spending, but the cruel tests that have taken place over the years. So maybe you answered my next question. How many of these treatments have found cures in humans that come from this cruel kind of testing?
Thank you. I will now yield to Ms. Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your advocacy on this and protecting so many animals against this, as we've heard, savage research that has been taking place not only in the United States, but all throughout the world. And I want to thank our witnesses today for your boldness to come out, because it seems like anytime we expose millions and billions even of dollars that are spent towards ridiculous research programs or just organizations themselves, we are lashed out at, we're called crazy and conspiracists. And I want to thank you so much for taking a bold step. I want to thank you for the White Coat Waste Project, because this is not only saving precious beagles' lives, but really exposing to the American taxpayer where their money is going. And I think we all want to be good stewards of our tax money. We are responsible for those tax dollars here in Congress, and it's our responsibility to be stewards and overseers of that. So I'm grateful for DOGE to come in alongside of us to help expose some of this and kind of get those wheels turning. But just for the folks back home real quick, before I get into my questions, I want to just highlight 1 million seconds is 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years and 7 months. It's like this is a huge difference. So when we're talking about billions of dollars going towards the cruelty of animals, it is much larger than what it sounds, because it's been so watered down to hear that Congress is spending millions or billions or even trillions of dollars. God forbid if we find out what comes after a trillion, we'll start spending that too. But Mr. Goodman, since 1998, how much do you believe that the federal government has spent on animal cruelty testing?
Thank you for the question. That's, as we've been discussing, it's tough because there's not a lot of transparency about actually how much tax dollars are being spent. I would say we're probably looking at $1 trillion in spending by NIH since '98, and if about 47% of that is used for experiments on animals, $500 billion could have potentially been spent on animal testing since 1998.
That is an extreme number. Thank you for that. And Mr. Goodman, how much money do you think that NIAID wasted on unethical and useless and abusive testing? I would imagine it's about the same, because none of this has been very useful or effective.
Yeah, so Dr. Fauci ran NIAID from 1984 to 2022, and when he left at the end of 2022, it had a $6.5 billion budget. Again, we don't know what percentage of that was for animal testing, but probably higher than the average across NIH. And I just want to make a note here that Dr. Fauci, and I don't have any issue with him outside of his abuse of animals, he was not just a paper pusher. He was personally involved in animal experimentation, experimenting on monkeys, giving them HIV-like viruses until the day he left NIH. He was the lead investigator on grants that were funded by taxpayers to do that. And he started his career by infecting chimpanzees with HIV and promising we were going to have an AIDS vaccine back in the 80s, which we never got because, as you mentioned, they don't get HIV, they don't get AIDS, they don't get sick. So there's been an enormous amount of waste and abuse, and his legacy, unfortunately, he's gone from government, but his legacy at NIAID lives on.
Yes, fortunately, he has gone from government, but that doesn't prevent us from holding him accountable for not only the wasteful spending, but the cruel tests that have taken place over the years. So maybe you answered my next question. How many of these treatments have found cures in humans that come from this cruel kind of testing?
Virtually none. We've heard the statistics today, and any that have come, it's out of pure dumb luck, and they're the exception, not the rule, because animal experiments are a dead end. It's pure chance if something good comes out of it.
And so I'm seeing here with NIAID, the budget of spending $6.5 billion in taxpayer money. It's been used to pay EcoHealth Alliance to import hundreds of Asian bats into the U.S. for new viruses in labs in Colorado run by the Wuhan-linked researchers. That's $6.7 billion for the Colorado State University in Fort Collins to research bats here in in America. And we've also sent billions of taxpayer dollars to unaccountable labs in China and other foreign countries implant aborted baby parts into lab animals. Have you heard of that sort of research?
Yeah, we did an analysis a few years ago showing that over 90% of experiments with using human fetal tissue and putting them involved animals were funded by Fauci's NIAID.
Do you know where they're getting the aborted human fetal tissue?
A lot of it is happening at colleges and universities that have affiliated hospitals that perform that procedure.
Madam Chair, I think we need to look into that as well. My time has expired. I apologize to our other witnesses. I did have questions for you, but I'll submit those in writing. Thank you.
And I'm going to yield to myself for 5 minutes, and Congresswoman Boebert, I'm going to yield to you for a minute or two if you have. I think you had a couple extra questions you want to ask. My first question, Mr. Goodman, what is the worst animal testing experiment you've ever heard of and uncovered? There's some really bad ones out there. What is the absolute worst one you've ever heard of and uncovered?
The kitten cannibalism was pretty horrendous. Breeding kittens just to force them to eat cat meat and then killing them even though they were perfectly healthy after they collected their feces out of a litter box. I mean, that's literally what was happening. They were doing that to thousands and thousands of kittens. The DOJ, until recently, was stabbing, shooting, and blowing up live animals for training exercises. We were able to cut that and defund that. The experiments that the NIH funded and Fauci funded in Tunisia, where they were putting the dogs and heads in mesh cages and filling them with biting flies. Yeah, there's a lot of nightmare stuff that we're being forced to fund, and taxpayers don't like it, and they don't even know how bad the situation is. If they did, they would be, marching in the streets.
Yeah, and Dr. Locke, a question for you. What are the prospects of a drug therapy that fails animal testing? Is it likely to receive regulatory approval?
Thank you for your question. I'm not an expert on the drug development process, but the way you've described things, I think if the drug would not make it through the tests that are required, it would not be able to be in the market. If I could just add, though, that Congress has really looked closely at this issue about developing drugs and has passed a law, the FDA Modernization Act, that removed the requirements for testing drugs. And my understanding is that there's bipartisan support for another law because Congress feels that the FDA is not moving more quickly in this area. That is the FDA Modernization Act 3.0 that would force the agency to really pay a lot more attention to using alternatives.
Okay, and then Ms. Baker, before I hand it over to Ms. Boebert, I love your idea of revisiting the Animal Welfare Act. I would be open to working with you in finding that language and doing a bill that would insert that language to define what an animal is. I think it's very important. I'm all about small parts, big difference. Of course, I would like to eradicate animal testing altogether, but that seems like an easy win that we could work on together in a nonpartisan manner. So I would love to talk to you about that, and I will yield the last 2.5 minutes to Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the NIH probably should change their acronym to FOD, Faces of Death. This very much sounds like a show that my mother would not let me watch as a child. And, just hearing how egregious this is, there's many more things that I have listed here. Of course, we've heard of the beagles who were in the mesh cages. I don't know if their vocal cords were paralyzed or if they were removed, but they were prevented from barking, correct?
Yeah, there was a project that Dr. Fauci funded. Actually, we worked with Chairwoman Mace to expose that they were doing drug testing where they were poisoning puppies with massive doses of drugs, and the laboratory cut there was actually a line item in the contract for a cordectomy.
Wow.
To cut the vocal cords so the dogs would not bark in the lab.
Wow. And so we've heard that. We've heard of electroshock therapy, even to the point where cats had their spinal cords exposed, their back sliced open, and that electroshock therapy was given to test for erectile dysfunction and cognitive issues and so many other things. And so I ended my last round of questioning talking about the implantation of aborted fetal tissues. And you said that universities partner with clinics who are performing these abortions. Now, how does that process work and who funds that? Are the mothers of these aborted babies giving permission? Do they know it's taking place? Is there taxpayer funding in the crosshairs of that other than the actual testing itself?
That's outside of my wheelhouse.
Okay, that, again, Madam Chair, I think this is something we should look into. I would love to see just what permissions are granted and given for that. I know that we have some regulatory framework within the Department of Health and Human Services and the Public Health Service Act, and regulations include prohibitions on buying or selling the tissue of valuable consideration, but also, but they allow for compensation for costs associated with the tissue handling. And so I would love to look into that. So not only can we prevent the cruelty in the animals like these beautiful beagles we see here today, but also even our children who are being harmed in this process as well, for whatever reason it may be. But Madam Chair, I would love to continue to work with you on this and hold Dr. Fauci, the NIH, NIAID, and everyone else accountable for this wasteful spending, and I yield.
Thank you. I'd now like to yield 5 minutes to Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you for bringing this egregious and evil issue to our attention. All right, the new guy is learning. All right, thank you, Chairwoman, for
You're doing great.
Thank you for bringing this egregious and evil issue to my attention. I don't think anyone in my district or our country would approve. I want to thank you for our witnesses for coming in. As a veteran, as a Navy SEAL, we use dogs, and they save many lives. We call them furry missiles. And my wife and I have a great Pyrenees, and our dog is part of the family. And I was not aware of what you've brought to our attention. And after listening to what the chairwoman talked about this being a bipartisan issue, it should be. It's definitely evidence that evil does exist. And we spend more in our country per day than we bring in per day, which is going to sink this country if you don't get under control. I cannot believe the amount of money that we are spending to do these crazy things. I want to start with Dr. Locke. Approximately how many drugs are on the market today rely on safety and efficacy data from multiple animal models before being allowed to move to human clinical trials?
Thank you for your question. I don't have a good figure for you, other than to say that, as you correctly stated, the law requires safety and efficacy, and before the FDA Modernization Act was passed, and probably even after it was passed, most of those drugs almost certainly had to go through some sort of animal testing. But I can't put a number on it, I'm sorry.
No worries. I strongly advocate for the welfare of animals. Dr. Locke, would you agree that eliminating animal testing entirely from the research and development of drugs and vaccine could significantly hinder our ability to assess safety and efficacy, potentially delaying life-saving treatments?
At the present time, we would need to transition away from animals. Yes, I do agree with that statement.
That's what I think. All right, Dr. Locke, given your knowledge in alternative testing models, can you briefly list and describe different examples of technological alternatives?
Yes, thank you for your question. One of the ones I mentioned in my testimony are these things called organs on a chip, which are just like what they sound like. They're small engineered devices, and they mimic the organs that we have in our body. So there's a lung on a chip, there's a heart on a chip, there's a liver on a chip, and those don't have exactly the same the same functions that our organs do, but they have enough so that you can make good decisions based on the biology that you learn from those. In many cases, you can actually put human cells in there. You're putting human cells in there to study chemicals. And you can also begin to link these together to get a whole body on a chip. Another area where we've had a lot of advances in developing these things called organoids. So organoids are groups of cells from, let's say, a brain or a liver or a heart, and you put them in a dish and they actually organize themselves into something that looks like a human organ, but it's not exactly the same. But again, it has enough function so you can study it and you can expose it to chemicals and you can expose it to other things so that you might know what it is going to impact it. The important thing to remember about these two is that in terms of cost effectiveness, you can put these in a well plate and you can do many, many studies at the same time. Unlike with animals where you have a very, very slow throughput, these you have either a medium or a high throughput. So those are two examples that I'm most familiar with. Our other witnesses have mentioned AI, computational models. That's another very, very powerful one. But we have all these unbelievable techniques now where we can actually use these for personalized medicine. So I think everyone here has a medical school in their district or a university in their district that does this. But for example, if I was suffering from a disease and there were two options for treatment for that disease, and one was, let's say, a chemical and the other was a radiation treatment, you could actually take cells from my body and you could regress those cells to stem cells, then make
Well,
them
I
organ cells.
apologize,
Oh,
I'm running out of
sorry.
time. I have another question. I wish
Okay.
I had a list of the egregious things that my colleague Lauren Boebert listed. I couldn't believe half of or any of them. But I heard them mention kitten cannibalism, which is unbelievable. Is that true? And if so, where did it happen? When did it happen? What did they think they were going to achieve?
I don't have any information on that question, I'm sorry.
Does any of the witnesses have?
Yeah, my organization exposed that in 2018. The USDA's Agricultural Research Service, ARS, in Beltsville had a lab where they were breeding hundreds of kittens every year and doing feeding experiments with them, including going to wet markets in China and Brazil and other places, buying dog and cat meat, bringing it back to the United States and force feeding that meat to kittens for studies looking at the prevalence of toxoplasmosis in dog and cat meat in wet markets abroad.
Proof that evil does exist. Thank you, Chairwoman, for bringing this to our attention, and hopefully we can stop this evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. I would now like to yield to the Ranking Member Brown for any brief closing remarks she may have.
Just want to thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to doing some good work on this subcommittee.
And I want to thank the ranking member, and I look forward to working with you. And in fact, we were just talking offline here. I was saying I want to get on her bill about cosmetics and animal testing. So all good things today. Today's conversation builds upon the work that I and many of us on oversight and throughout Congress have been working on for years to end animal testing. There are many of us up here, and we're not working fast enough. We're trying as hard as we can, so we appreciate the witnesses being here today. Last Congress, I introduced the Preventing Animal Abuse and Waste Act to prohibit the NIH from conducting or funding research that causes significant pain or distress to cats or dogs. As an animal lover, I've been disturbed to learn about these barbaric and unnecessary experiments to create transgender mice, rats, and monkeys. I, like most humans, have a deep adoration and love for all of God's creatures, including our animals. And one of my earliest memories as a child was being in Hampton, South Carolina. I was like 4 years old, and my grandmother just made some great biscuits and breakfast, and she gave me this bright pink album, and it was just full of pictures of animals from the newspaper from Hampton. And ever since then, I've just loved them so much. And I grew up with 7 pets. We had 3 dogs, 3 cats, and a parrot named Julio. And so it's just important for the work that we're doing that all of God's creatures, all animals, are treated with respect and dignity and love, and that they're not murdered and maimed and killed on these horrific experiments. So this Congress, I will continue to fight to end all animal testing, including by introducing legislation that prohibits use of federal funds for these cruel animal sex change experiments. Thank you again to our panelists. The issue of taxpayer-funded animal cruelty deserves our time and attention. I'm thankful for your expert testimony today. And with that, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will then be forwarded to the witnesses for their response, and we are now adjourned.